Hey everybody, Bungzy here with another Ultralight review on Ultralight backpacking. Today we're going to take a look at the considerations of choosing between two very popular Ultralight tents, both made by Zpacks, namely the Zpacks Altaplex and their Plexamid tents. These are both great tents, but I recommend one over the other. Let's talk about why. First up, the topic of weight. They both come in a variety of material choices with varying deniers or thicknesses. The higher the denier, the more durable, the less translucent the material, and obviously the heavier. That being said, I always go with their lightest denier. I've been buying their tents for a long time, and the lightest denier is still durable. I've never had a problem that I would attribute to the lighter denier. And sticking with weight, I also never use the tent stuff sacks. I have a whole video on why, which I released recently. Take a peek if you haven't already, up above. Okay, with all that in mind, the current Altaplex weighs 15.13 ounces in the lighter denier. And by the way, you can switch out the guidelines to lighten any tent. One small side note, the Altaplex was updated last year. The previous Altaplex was notably heavier, so if you're buying one used, it's a good chance it's an entirely different animal. The Plexamid in comparison weighs 15.23 ounces. Bottom line, they pretty much weigh the same, with the Altaplex being only 0.1 ounce lighter. On an aside, why in the world would Zpacks even make two tents with such similar specs and weights? It's a really good question. I don't know how Zpacks would answer that question, but here's my recollection and take on a theory as to why. The Altaplex has been around for several years. When Zpacks originally released the Plexamid just a couple of years ago, if that, the pre-existing Altaplex was notably heavier. So the Plexamid was an attempt at getting the weight down, which they accomplished. The older Altaplex model used a heavier bug netting that Zpacks has since upgraded. I believe they've done it in all their tents. So between the lighter bug netting and maybe some other tweaks to the Altaplex, Zpacks realized they could get their tent weights down. So they did. And in so doing, they managed to get the Altaplex weight down actually below the Plexamid. If Zpacks had run that exercise of updating their material on the Altaplex before they came up with the Plexamid design, would they have commercially released the Plexamid? I'm not sure they would have. But again, just a theory. Getting back to the topic of weight. While they are both single pole shelters, the apex of the Altaplex is significantly higher and therefore requires an atypically long extendable trekking pole, like the one Zpacks sells. Or you need some other means of jacking up your trekking pole. You can jimmy your existing poles to work in a couple of different ways. One option is an extension tube like the one Zpacks sells. Another is a pair of straps like these that hold the pole together to make them one longer pole. Assuming your trekking poles aren't in fact long enough, and again most aren't, I would highly recommend going with strategy number 2, the straps. Here's one, but it actually need a pair. The extension pole strategy is wonky. I don't like it at all. It wobbles around and puts a lot of tension on that high tension connection point. The strap strategy is far more sturdy. In fact, it's extremely sturdy, more sturdy than just one pole alone. Now, where do you get them? Zpacks does not sell these. I purchased a pair from Hyperlight Mountain Gear. Turn that the right side around. I'll link to it in the video description below. The reason I mention all of this is that it does add a little weight to the Altaplex kit, and it gives you another step in your setup. Plus another item or two you have to keep track of if you go down the Altaplex path. By the way, my trimmed down pair of straps, I did cut them down, weigh 1.02 ounces, while a Zpacks pole jack weighs 1.2 ounce. So while the Altaplex comes in again 0.1 ounce lighter, it really isn't lighter once you add the weight of the straps or the pole jack. So in practice, the Plexamid is actually heavier, though we are only talking about 0.9 ounces. Let's move on to volume. Both tents have 7.5 feet of interior length. That's long. The Altaplex, however, has 10 inches more of headroom at 58 inches, compared to the Plexamid's 48 inches of height. So significant edge to Altaplex on headroom. As for width, the Plexamid has 2 extra inches of width at 38 inches, compared to the Altaplex's 36-inch width. What to make of these dimensions? Personally, I highly value the added headspace of the Altaplex, and I don't miss the 2 inches of width of the Plexamid. The Altaplex is by no means skinny with 36 inches of width. Typical sleeping pads only range from 20 to 25 inches in width, so there is plenty of room. Those 2 inches of extra width gained by going with the Plexamid over the Altaplex, in my experience, don't make me any more comfortable or give me any more functional storage space. It's the same experience. At 36 inches wide and 7.5 feet in length, there is plenty of storage space in the width and at the head and foot for these tents. Now let's touch on durability. The key difference here is the squared off peak in the Plexamid, which is made possible by 2 titanium support rods that are bowed and kept under pressure by some little pull pockets and straps. They used to be fiberglass, but Zpacks switched them out to titanium down the road a bit. Took me a week to get the fiberglass splinters out of my fingers when I switched out my pair. Thanks, Zpacks. Check out my old B-roll video on the Plexamid if you want a closer look at this design feature. Links up above. A lot of people express concern over the durability of the unique peak design of the Plexamid. There's quite a bit of nuance to this unique peak. Lots of material, stitching, loops, and added tape. While I think the concerns are overstated, I always give bonus points to gear that is simple. The simpler the gear, the fewer points of potential failure. So again, while the Plexamid is a well-designed and well-made tent, I have to give the Altaplex the win on durability. There's significantly less points of potential failure due to its simple peak design. And there's consequently less tent to baby while on the trail. The less gear you have to baby and worry about while you're out there, the better. I have one more point to make in my comparison, and it's my biggest point. I recently released a video on my recommended tent packing strategy. I highly recommend giving it a watch. If you haven't already, I'll throw the link up above. In the video, I walk you through why I leave my tent stuff sack at home and instead loosely roll and store my tent near the top of my pack, just outside the pack liner. In short, besides simplifying the chores of making and breaking camp, it also ensures I show up for camp with a tent that is as dry as possible. Watch the video where I lay out my tent packing strategy and the logic behind it. Getting back to the comparison though, the squared off rigid peak of the Plexamid makes packing up and storing your tent so much harder and more time consuming. You can't just quickly roll and tuck your tent into your pack or just stuff it in for that matter. In fact, it may not even fit if you got a tiny pack. And yes, you can remove the Plexamid struts, but it's not designed with that in mind. It takes a bit of effort to get the 2 struts properly seated. I can't imagine anyone is removing and replacing them with every use. So you have to work your roll around the rigid rectangular peak. It's a little more complicated and unintuitive than it sounds, and so besides wasting time and energy, it will also act to deter you from airing your tent out during the day. This is the key point. There's a pain in the arse factor that comes with packing up the Plexamid, which dramatically increases the odds of your tired, lazy butt saying, screw it, I'll just deal with my wet tent when I get to camp. And that, to me, is a major benefit of going with the Altaplex over the Plexamid. As I detailed in my tent packing video, picking a tent and a pack, picking a tent and packing a tent to make this exercise effortless is critical. So while these are both great tents, the clear winner to me is the Altaplex. While weight is pretty much a wash, the Altaplex wins on headroom, on reliability, and ease of packing, which in turn significantly increases the chance you'll make the effort to air it out during breaks and lunch. So, go Team Altaplex. Well, that's all the time I need, and I hope I gave you something to think about. As always, please help me grow the show by hitting the like button and clicking on the Bungzy logo floating on the screen to subscribe if you haven't already. It helps me a ton. Thanks, and I'll catch you on my next Ultralight review on Ultralight backpacking.